Well, two things come to mind. No rules coming from you. So in other words, okay, well, when we go in here, we're going to sit over. I know you may not necessarily do this, although maybe you would. Okay, when we go there, we're going to sit over here, and then we're going to try to get to know these people, because I haven't met this person yet, and we don't want to talk to so and so about such and such, because remember that last time that happened. So if you start creating a bunch of rules up front, you're setting your own trap. So that's point number one. Don't give him the impression that there's going to have to be a bunch of rules. Number two, now you're probably not going to like this one. It needs to be timed, and he needs to know when you're going to get the hell out of there. You would probably want to spend 3 to 6 hours over there, wouldn't you? Yeah. As the clock ticks, the wick to that stick of dynamite is burning down. Oh, so in an ideal world, told you wouldn't like it, 60 minutes max. If you can get 90 minutes out of him without you intuiting some distress from his vibes, you'll be lucky. So we'll say 60 to 90. If you're going to plan on spending 2 or 3 or 4 hours or wherever you're going, then do this for your own sanity. You two, depending on how far it is, of course, this may not be possible if you're going to travel a long way. You would go in 2 separate vehicles so that when he feels like his brain's about ready to explode, he can leave and you can stay. I know that's not always the case, because some people are taking 3, 4, 5, 6 hours or taking a flight, but even then there can be an escape, unless you're just staying with family, and I would strongly advise against that one. You would have a hotel room and maybe a rental car, so even there would be some escape. So in an ideal world, in summary, don't create a bunch of rules up front, because that's instantly going to stress him out before you even put one foot in the door wherever you guys are going. And whatever way you can think of, give him a way to escape. Either the two of you are going to leave at the 90-minute mark, or he drives separately and can leave after whenever he wants to leave. If he wants to have his phone, if he's over there on the phone not engaging in anybody and he's playing video games on his phone over there in the corner, you just leave him be. If he's on his phone at the 90-minute mark and he seems to be engaged in that, then that's just as good as going home as far as an escape route. That would save you from having to take 2 separate vehicles or trying to explain why he left after 45 minutes. If he has ASD level 1, as opposed to just being accused of having it, he will tend to turn his emotions way down, not completely off, but it's come from many years of, honestly, emotions getting in the way of their logical thinking. So it's not that he doesn't have any room for emotions, but in most cases, if he were to be honest, in most cases, he doesn't see any need for emotions. He might even go so far as to say they just kind of get in the way of completing tasks, because he is very task-oriented. So his motto might be remove the emotions and accomplish the task more efficiently. The emotions are messy, and they get in the way of logical thinking. The NT wives in here are emotions experts. So you see there's one hell of a contrast there. So there is a huge disconnect between the NT wife and the ASD husband. You're living it. And they also deal with their stress differently. And so there has been relationship stress for how long? Year, 5, 10? So when there is, and everybody in here is experiencing relationship stress due to the neurodiverse difficulties. The NT wife, when she's dealing with stress, she will tend to, not 100% of the time, but she will tend to implode, and that could look like sulking or depression, just to grab 2 out of the air real quick. He will tend to explode, and I'm not saying he never does shutdowns, but his preferred method as an anxiety reduction strategy, his preference will be to explode most of the time. During relationship stress, she will want to talk about the problems, and she'll want to share and talk about feelings. And she prefers connection during crisis, if we want to call it crisis. He doesn't. He's out of touch with his feelings, and he's way out of touch with your feelings. So if you want to have feelings discussions, you've automatically lost it being some kind of resolution. He's not going to want to talk about the problems. He doesn't want to share emotions, and he prefers, quite honestly, most of the time prefers disconnection during crisis. During crisis, she will want to bond, associate, seek support. He will want to disassociate, and he may end up doing some version of a meltdown or a shutdown. The moral to this story is you can see why there is this issue going on. And I'm not trying to get him off the hook when I say this. But if somebody asks me, which they have not, what is the number one out of the list of problems, and there are many, what is the number one issue? If there is a root cause, what would it be? It would be his anxiety around relationship difficulties. If he has ASD level 1, he has mind blindness issues, emotions blindness issues, executive function deficits, all of which create huge anxiety. What I run into most often, if he were to be honest with himself, he often feels confused and insecure in the relationship. This causes a lot of anxiety. He's always in the process of alleviating anxiety, either with a shutdown or a meltdown or just staying busy outside of the relationship. But unfortunately, and now this is the message to the guys in here, your anxiety reduction strategies have, in most cases, made your anxiety worse because you just kicked the can down the road. And so all of these things that relationship difficulties that you might have been trying to avoid, they accumulate, they don't disappear. They build up and they pile up, and she gets more resentful and bitter and complaining, etc. And why wouldn't she? Which then makes you, the guy on the spectrum, feel even more unsafe in the relationship. And so we get into this loop. The point being, you can understand why we have a problem. It shouldn't be a surprise, nor should you feel like either one of you should feel like you've done something wrong, or that you are stupid, or that you failed, or that you should have done better, and all of this and that, because you didn't have, when things were at their worst and you didn't know what was really going on, you were just doing the best to tread water. You're doing the best that you know how to do at the time. So I got an email from a husband with ASD level 1, and he was saying that I talk about how social skills can be taught. And so his question is, well, exactly how does one go about learning social skills? Well, you're going to need some outside assistance, a seeing eye dog, so to speak, and that could be a social skills coach, could be a life coach, job coach, an accountability partner, and in some cases, if your NT wife is willing to do so, she could be a compassionate coach from time to time. So let's pick a social skill to use as an example. Let's say, for example, you're not really great at give and take in conversation, and you interrupt your NT wife as she is talking. You have a thought, and you just dive in and step on her tongue and throw your thought in the mix, or maybe offer advice that's not necessarily wanted or needed. And so she gets the impression that you're more interested in talking about your viewpoint than listening to her viewpoint. So this is one of these hidden social rules where you don't interrupt the speaker. You kind of wait until the other person pauses, and then you interject. The first phase of learning a social skill would be unconscious incompetence. And so to use the example of give and take in conversation, you interject or interrupt, and you're not aware that you're doing it. You don't know what you don't know. And so you violate this hidden social rule repeatedly, and you're unaware. Now let's say that the two of you have agreed that she's going to cue you in a very tactful manner to let you know when you interrupt, and you're okay with that. You're not going to download that as criticism. So she's talking, you do what you usually do and interrupt, and then she goes, remember when we said I was going to point out to you when you interrupt? He says, yeah. Okay, well, there was an interruption right there.
And so now she is cueing you to the interruptions. And now this is the second phase of learning a social skill, which is conscious incompetence. What I mean by that, you still haven't cultivated that social skill yet, but now you're becoming aware of it by virtue of her cueing. Okay? So now the next phase would be conscious competence. And this is where you're beginning to develop the habit of not interrupting. She speaks. You're fully aware that your tendency is to interrupt, but you're not interrupting. You're waiting for the pause, and then you come in and put your 2 cents in, or provide her with some feedback on what she just said. So you're consciously aware that you are no longer violating this hidden social rule of don't interrupt the speaker. Then the fourth and final phase of learning a social skill is called unconscious competence. In this fourth and final phase, you have fully developed the new habit of give and take in conversation. You take some conversation from her, then you give some conversation back. You take some from her, you give some back. It's a ping pong effect now, rather than you dominating the conversation or interrupting the flow. And you're not even aware that you are doing it right. It's become an unconscious habit now. It's running on autopilot. And so that is the fourth and final phase, which is unconscious competence. So we go from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence to conscious competence to unconscious competence. And we got there because you had, in this example, you got a cue from your NT wife that you were interrupting. You made a behavior change, and the reward is now you have developed a new social skill. And those are 3 important factors there we're going to talk about now. Cue, behavior change, and reward. Except we'll use a different example here. I'm going to borrow one from one of my clients. He was accused of being a workaholic, and he admits that he was. And so he would work late at the office, and he would get home after the family had already eaten dinner. And so his wife was complaining that he wasn't spending enough time in the evenings with the family. And so what he did was he set up his own cue. In this case, he put a timer on the lights in his office, and at 5 o'clock, the lights shut off. And he took 3 to 5 minutes to tie up any loose ends and wrap it up, and he left. So the lights shutting off right at 5 o'clock was the cue. The behavior change was he packed up and left and went home and spent time with his family and actually ate dinner with his family. And so that was the behavior change. And then the reward was happy wife, happy life. In other words, she felt better about the relationship because she didn't feel like work was more important to him than she was. And the reward was less tension in the marriage. And it was a big reward according to him. So that was a long way around the bush to illustrate one way to learn social skills. But bear in mind, you will need some outside assistance. This is not something that you can necessarily do on your own. I'm sure it's happened before where guys have done it on their own, but that's taking the very, very long road. So best to recruit the assistance from somebody else who would be very eager to help. One final note, guys, the important point here is consistency. Practice, 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 practice. Because you want to develop a new habit that runs on autopilot. And the only way you're going to get there is chronic, emphasis on chronic practicing. Now, practice may not necessarily mean perfect. That's okay. We're not shooting for perfection. But practice will definitely make permanent. In other words, you may still interrupt the speaker from time to time. That's okay. But if you're not doing that 80% of the time now, rather than only 10%, and you're consistently doing that over time, that's permanent. So we're not shooting for perfection, but practice does make permanent. Okay, so I get emails a lot from neurotypical wives who state that when they get into conflict or an argument with their high-functioning autistic husband, he always has to make her wrong. And so we want to look at that real quickly. So if I have Asperger's or high-functioning autism, I have what is referred to as a developmental disorder, which means that my social emotional brain is underdeveloped. So in other words, my social intelligence and my emotional intelligence is low compared to my logical brain. In fact, you could think of high-functioning autism as a disorder of social skills. So as a result of having a low-functioning social emotional brain, I have this thing called mind blindness. In other words, I have a hard time predicting what might be in the mind of another individual, what they might be thinking or feeling. So if I'm the person with high functioning autism and I'm dealing with my neurotypical spouse in this example, I truly have no clue how she might be thinking or feeling. Therefore, when she has a perspective or opinion that's different from mine, I simply can't wrap my brain around her perspective. In fact, her viewpoint will make utter nonsense to me. So, since I am blind to her perspective, I will tend to view her differing opinion as she is disagreeing with me. And then I'll tend to make a thinking error and say to myself, because she's disagreeing with me, therefore she's against me. And then I'll tend to make another thinking error and say to myself, because she's against me, I must defend myself and prove that she is wrong and illogical. Because if I don't make her wrong, that means I'm wrong. But only one person can be right, and that person must be me, since my perspective is the only perspective that I can see. Emphasis on the term see right there. So, in other words, since I can't comprehend her thoughts or feelings, therefore her thoughts and feelings are not valid. Therefore, she's wrong and I'm right. Okay, so now we want to look at why your partner or spouse with Asperger's syndrome or high-functioning autism tends to blame you for the relationship difficulties. If you, for example, are a neurotypical wife in a marriage with a husband with Asperger's syndrome, you probably have discovered that whenever there are issues or conflict, you are the bad guy, and he blames you for the relationship difficulties. And you may have had the thought many times, he is such a selfish, insensitive, uncaring bastard. And what if I were to tell you that that's probably not the case? Rather, the fact that he's not responding the way you would hope is due to one of the traits that he suffers from. We're specifically talking about theory of mind deficits. So let's look at that briefly. Theory of mind is an important social cognitive skill that involves the ability to think about mental states, both your own and those of others. It involves the ability to attribute mental states, including emotions, desires, beliefs, and knowledge. Not only does the theory of mind involve thinking about thinking, but it also refers to the ability to understand the ability to understand that others' thoughts and beliefs may be different from your own, and to consider the factors that have led to those mental states. Now, why is this called theory of mind? Well, psychologists refer to this as a theory of mind because our beliefs about what might happen or what might be going on in another person's head are just that, theories. They're kind of educated guesses. While we make predictions, we can definitely make predictions, but we have no direct way of knowing exactly what a person might be thinking or what their motivations might be. All we can rely on is our own theories or hypotheses that we develop based on what people say, how they act, what we know about their personalities, and what we can infer about their intentions. So why is this theory of mind stuff so important? Well, the emergence of a theory of mind is really critical during the developmental process. Very young children tend to be more egocentric, as I'm sure the parents in here are aware of, and are often unable to think about the mental states of others. Now, as people age, their theory of mind does emerge and continues to develop. So forging a strong theory of mind plays an important role in our social worlds as we work to understand how people think, to predict their behavior, to engage in social relationships, to solve interpersonal conflicts, and so on. So in order to interact with other people, it's important to be able to understand their mental states and to think about how those mental states might influence their actions. So in other words, you connect your guesstimate about what they're thinking with your guesstimate about how they may act based on their thinking. And this is all stuff that you do at a very unconscious level as a neurotypical. These things come about almost at an just automatically. It's a natural state of mind, not so much with people with Asperger's. Theory of mind allows people to infer the intentions of others, as well as to think about what's going on in someone else's head, including hopes, fears, beliefs, expectations, and so on. So social interactions, as you know, can be very complex, even for neurotypicals. And misunderstandings can make them even more complex and confusing. By being able to develop accurate ideas of what other people are thinking, or at least fairly accurate ideas, we're better able to respond accordingly. So here is the problem. People with Asperger's and high functional autism have great difficulty with this theory of mind business. In fact, there's a lot of research on this that reveals that people on the autism spectrum have trouble using theory of mind to make moral judgments in many situations. There was one study that specifically found that Asperger's adults were more likely than neurotypical subjects to blame other people for their problems. And this is what I say, you may have experienced this with your husband who has Asperger's syndrome. So the judgments of people with Asperger's rely more on outcome of the incident rather than on understanding the other person's intentions. Let me state that again. The judgments of people with Asperger's and high-functioning autism tend to rely more on the outcome of the incident rather than on understanding the other person's intentions. Here's an example, and this was part of the research. And in one scenario, James had a friend, and they were snowmobiling in an area known for loose snow. So this friend asks James if he should take an easterly route around a row of pine trees. And James had looked it up, and he did a little quick analysis while they were on the slopes, and he found out that they had an alert that avoiding the west slope was the safest way to go. And so he told his friend that going, the east route would probably be okay. So the friend takes off in that direction, but unfortunately starts an avalanche, which quickly overtook him and buried him alive. Now, in this scenario, and this was just a hypothetical scenario that the researchers put forth before these subjects, the researchers found that people with Asperger's were more likely than neurotypical subjects to blame James for his friend's death, even though James believed the slope was harmless. So that was kind of an interesting research project that does reflect the fact that judgments of people with Asperger's do tend to rely more on outcomes rather than on inferring what the other person's intentions were. So that was a long way around the bush to get to the point, and that is, this is why your partner or spouse with Asperger's or high-functioning autism does tend to blame you for the relationship difficulties, because he's only looking at the outcomes, in other words, what happened after the argument, rather than trying to understand your thoughts, feelings, motivations, intentions, and so on. So I have a question here from my neurotypical wife, and she states, my husband with Asperger's seems to have a better relationship with his mother than with me. There's certainly more intimacy and consideration there. I don't mean in the sexual nature, of course, but he and his mother are like buddies, and I'm kind of like the outsider in that group. Well, keep in mind that your husband with Asperger's has a developmental disorder. So that simply means that developmentally, his social intelligence and emotional intelligence is low compared to his logical brain. So therefore, this concept of, we'll just call it social hierarchy, for lack of a better term, would perhaps be a foreign concept to him. We could also call it prioritized allegiance. And all I mean by that is there's kind of this hidden rule that when you get married, your wife kind of takes the first spot and mommy takes the second spot. And I don't mean with respect to level of love, but typically you cleave unto your wife, right? And the marriage comes first, the kids come second, extended family members come third, with respect to how you treat people, not necessarily level of love. So when you don't feel like a priority, and you perceive that his mom is more of a priority than you, I think what's really going on there is just a confusion due to low social emotional intelligence around prioritized allegiance. So you could have a 35-year-old man with high-functioning autism or Asperger's who emotionally is more like a 14-year-old. So at some level, it's kind of like an adult child who has never truly left home in the emotional sense. So to emotionally detach from mommy in a healthy, more mature way is probably not going to happen to the degree that it would with somebody who does not have a developmental disorder. Okay, guys, of course, there's no magic bullet to save your marriage, but if there ever was one, it would be this. So listen up. Your wife has felt disconnected, unloved, that she was not important to you, that you're not giving her enough quantity time or quality time or empathy. And so what can you do in the event that you want to work on the relationship? Well, 3 things. You want to listen. You want to paraphrase back what she said using your words. And you want to take action based on what she has requested, based on her needs, wants, or expectations. So she feels unheard, she feels misunderstood, and she feels like you are more interested in your work or your special activity more so than her. So since she wants to be heard and understood, and for you to follow through with things that you say you're going to do to help the relationship, then your job is to listen, paraphrase back using your words, and implement. We're going to call that LPI. You want to listen as in put your phone down, get off the computer, look her in the eyes, or at least look in her direction at least. Give her the indication that you're listening. When she's done, you're going to paraphrase back, not parrot back, but paraphrase back what you heard. So A, she will know you listened to her, and B, she will know that you understood her because you used your words to describe back what she just said. If you paraphrase back and she says, no, that's not exactly what I meant, then she can repeat what she said, and then you can try again with your paraphrase. And then the third and final step then would be for you to follow through with some form of action based on what she needs or wants or what her expectations are. So, LPI, listen, paraphrase, implement. In working with clients on the autism spectrum, what I see pretty much 100% of the time is the individual's tendency to chronically get lost in thought, usually stressful thoughts. The autistic brain is very rarely paying attention to what's going on in the present moment. Oftentimes the individual is either ruminating about a past stressful event or worrying about the potentiality of a future stressful event, or they're simply experiencing stress in the present moment, the event that's occurring now. And the only reprieve they get from being lost in this rabbit hole of random stressful thinking is to get lost mentally in their special interest or their preferred activity. They're rarely at peace in the present moment, unless the present moment involves their mental engagement with their preferred activity. Now, we all have random unwanted thoughts that show up in our head without permission. We call these automatic thoughts. But when I work with individuals on the spectrum, I have just gathered a ton of anecdotal evidence from personal reports that their brain seems to run on autopilot without their permission pretty much 24/7. You know, we don't have to beat our heart. It beats without us putting forth any effort. In the same way, it appears that the autistic brain thinks without the individual putting in effort towards thinking. In other words, he's no longer in charge of his thoughts, rather his thoughts are in charge of him. He is literally a prisoner of chronic intrusive thinking patterns, and this translates to chronic anxiety to one degree or another, which in turn leads to the strong need to reduce the anxiety, which usually comes in the form of distraction through the use of a preferred activity or a preferred thought stream. Okay, we have another question here. She states, my partner has high functioning autism. When I talk to him about something that's important to me, he will zone out or he will pretend to be paying attention. But I always know when he has not heard me because he won't follow through with what he said he was going to do. He will agree to do something, but later will not complete the task. Well, what could be going on here and what I see most often is brain overload. And what I mean by that is the people with high functioning autism, they're people that are living in a verbal world, but they're actually visual learners. And so in the event that you are giving him too much information and maybe you're upset with him and you're droning on, to use a sarcastic term, for 10 or 15 minutes or more, he's going to reach data overload. But he might give you the impression that he's still absorbing your words. He might pretend that he's listening and understanding. But what's really going on is his brain has literally at some level short-circuited and he's not absorbing the information anymore. And that will occur at about the 5-minute mark. That's why you would want to keep your instruction short and concrete, because if you go long, especially 10, 15 minutes, and you're animated and upset with him, he is going to take a mental vacation in order to keep from getting overwhelmed. In other words, he's going to go off in his own little imaginary world just to escape from this stressful sensory input, which would be the words that you're throwing at him. Another thing that could be going on is he may quickly agree to do whatever you are telling him to do or asking him to do just to get the conversation over with. And this again is he's not purposely trying to be insensitive or to disregard your concerns or your needs or wants. Perhaps the way that you're going about it is stressing him out, and he just wants to, yeah, okay, honey, I'll do it. Fine. Yeah, I'll get to it. Just to reduce his anxiety. The other thing that could be going on too is, as you know, he probably has only one or two special interests. And if you give him some boring, mundane task that falls way outside of his special interest, boredom is excruciating to people on the autism spectrum. And so, since he only has one or two things that he prefers, and you give him some mundane task that's way outside of his special interest, he's going to get distracted doing his special interest and not get to the task that you want him to do, and he's probably going to forget about the task that you want him to do because he's absorbed in what he wants to do. So if you're a person with Asperger's syndrome and you struggle with anxiety, which most people on the autism spectrum do, here are 10 quickie little strategies to try. And nothing here is going to be very profound or new for you, but sometimes the simplest stuff is the most effective stuff. So the first thing is slow, deep belly breathing, especially focus on the exhalation. Try to make that anywhere between 5 and 10 seconds. So when you're anxious, your breathing becomes either faster or shallower. In some cases, I've known people to stop breathing altogether for a period of time. So try deliberately slowing down your breathing. You can count to 3 as you breathe in slowly, and then count to 3 as you breathe out slowly. Another one that everybody's familiar with is progressive muscle relaxation. So you're going to find a quiet location, close your eyes and slowly tense and then relax each of your muscle groups. You can do this from your toes to your head or any points. You can just focus on one point, perhaps, lower back and abdomen. So you're going to hold the tension for 3 seconds and then release quickly, and this can reduce the feelings of muscle tension that often comes from anxiety. Another familiar but very effective method for dealing with anxiety is to stay in the present moment. Anxiety can make your thoughts live in a terrible future that hasn't happened yet. So you want to try to bring yourself back to where you are, and this is a form of meditation in a sense. Also, take small acts of bravery. Would you want to try that? Avoiding what makes you anxious provides some relief in the short term, but can make you more anxious in the long term. So try approaching something that makes you anxious, even in a small way. The way through anxiety is by learning that what you fear isn't likely to happen, and if it does, you'll be able to cope with it. Also, you want to challenge your self-talk. How you think obviously affects how you feel. We all know that. Anxiety can make you overestimate the danger in a situation or underestimate your ability to handle it, though. So try to think of different interpretations to a situation that makes you anxious rather than just jumping to the worst case scenario, which most people with Asperger's syndrome tend to do from time to time. So look at the facts for and against your thought being true. Also, you can plan worry time. Just set aside time to worry. It's hard to stop worrying entirely, so, have some time to indulge your worries. It could just be 10 minutes. You could even write them down. And then after that 10 minutes, you say, okay, that's my worry time, so I'm going to get on with life now. And I can have more worry time later today or tomorrow, but for now, I'm going to put my worry on hold. You can also keep a diary of your anxiety. You want to look for the patterns and, plan the day accordingly. So get to know your anxiety. Keep a diary of when it's at its best and when it's at its worst. And then lastly, you can learn from others, especially people that also have Asperger's syndrome. Pick their brain. What have they done to deal with their anxiety? Okay, so in this video, I want to tell you a brief story of a man. We will call him Jason. Now, when Jason was a child, his parents knew from a very early age that something was not quite right. They discovered fairly quickly that he had some special needs. And so they probably went a little too far on the end of overprotective parenting and saved him from a lot of things that he wasn't good at. The only problem is, as they were trying to be a good parent and perhaps even somewhat of an overindulgent parent, he wasn't developing any social or emotional muscles for later in life. But their heart was in the right place. Then Jason went on to school, and unfortunately he got labeled as a problem student by the teacher, and he tried to fit in with his peer group. Unfortunately, that didn't happen very well. He got ostracized, teased, bullied. Finally, his parents had to pull him out of their regular classroom, and he went to a special education classroom where he got more one-on-one attention, which was great. And then when he became an adolescent, around puberty time, things really took a turn for the worse. He realized that he didn't fit in. He tried to get acceptance, couldn't get it. So he basically gave up and decided to take a different route and just isolate. Spent a lot of time in his bedroom playing video games. Was depressed much of his adolescence. Parents were very worried about him. He started some medication for depression, and his grades started to slip. But again, parents thinking they were doing the right thing, they didn't want to put any added pressure on him. So now we have a 17 or 18-year-old Jason who's emotionally more like an 8-year-old. Now, Jason did try to take a stab at college. That lasted about half of a semester, and he basically didn't leave his dormitory, didn't go to classes, just played video games again. So he came back home and lived at home for another 4 or 5 years. Then at about age 28, he did finally meet somebody that, a neurotypical female that he was very comfortable with, and he wanted her to like him. And so he was on his best behavior because he didn't want her to reject him like everybody else had. And they fell in love. They got married. He was greatly improved in the depression department, and they went through the honeymoon phase. And then once that phase kind of tapered off, he gravitated back to his special interest, which was computer gaming, and he kind of lost interest in a way in the marriage. And his neurotypical wife noticed that and began to complain and be concerned. And he started downloading her complaints and arguing as, yet again, somebody's not accepting me for who I am. And here again, I'm being ridiculed, rejected, and being told that I just don't measure up. So he heavily gravitated back to isolatory behavior again, just spending more and more time outside of the relationship. And then one day he decided that the marriage was more important to him than running from the problems. And so he reached out for assistance, and he currently is active today in therapy. It just happens to be with me online. And he is a very good student and very eager to save his marriage, and he's making some headway. Now, this isn't a commercial for me. This Jason, and that's just an anonymous name, that's your husband. The NTs out there listening to this, that's very likely a scenario that your spouse on the autism spectrum experienced to some degree. So, comments below this video would be greatly appreciated. How did this story about Jason compare to yours? Were there some similarities, some differences? I'd be eager to hear. Thank you. This was a story about Jason. Think of your autistic spouse's behavior as an iceberg. The behavior you're actually seeing is the tip of the iceberg, but there's a lot more going on under the surface. People on the autism spectrum can't always express their feelings through facial expressions, body language, or even speech. Instead, they may be expressed through other behaviors. Your spouse might be trying to tell you that he's tired, stressed, annoyed by something that happened earlier, or in need of some time alone. So don't simply assume that when he is acting out, so to speak, it's tied to him purposely being insensitive, uncaring, selfish, etc. Sometimes there will be a connection between the two, most of the times not. There is a range of reasons why people on the autism spectrum have difficulties with behavior. The world can be a confusing, isolating, and daunting place for your spouse, and it is his fundamental difficulties with communication and social interaction that are often the root cause of what you might view as difficult behavior. People on the autism spectrum can find it difficult to cope with change, whether a temporary change due to their timetable at work, or a more permanent change, such as moving to a different city. You may find that your spouse's behavior alters at times of change, but settles as he becomes used to a new environment or routine. Communication difficulties can impact on how people on the autism spectrum deal with social interactions. They may find social situations very demanding or stressful because they have to work hard to communicate with other people. These individuals often don't understand that other people hold different views from theirs. This may also make social interactions difficult. People on the autism spectrum may not understand social rules, which are unwritten rules that govern social situations, such as how close to stand to other people or how to take a turn in conversation. This is especially true if they find themselves in a new, unfamiliar situation. Therefore, social situations can be daunting and unpredictable. Some may engage in a particular behavior to try and avoid social contact. Many people on the spectrum have difficulties processing sensory information. For example, they may not be able to manage some tastes or food textures, or find that someone touching them even lightly is uncomfortable. Certain smells, lights, or sounds can be distressing. Some may find it difficult to block out background noise and what they experience as excessive visual information. Instead, sounds, lights, and other sights are all processed at the same level of intensity and lead to sensory overload. You may find that your spouse starts a repetitive behavior in stressful environments to try and block out external sensory information. These individuals can be very sensitive to subtle changes in their environment. If there's a sudden change in behavior, think about whether there has been recent change in the environment. People on the spectrum experience a number of difficulties with communication. For example, understanding what's being said to them, which is receptive language, understanding nonverbal communication, for example, facial expressions, body language, and communicating with others, which would be expressive language. Because of these difficulties, they can find it hard to communicate their needs or to understand what other people are saying to them or asking them to do, and this can cause considerable frustration and anxiety, which, if it can't be expressed any other way, may result in challenging behavior. People on the autism spectrum also can find sequencing very difficult, which is putting what is going to happen in a day in a logical order in their mind. They need to have timetables so they can see what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, and plan for it. However, unstructured time, which can be noisy and chaotic in some situations, may be difficult to deal with. This is because it's difficult for them to predict what will happen and how they are expected to behave. So you may find that behavioral difficulties in your spouse occur more in transition times. So these are some of the traits of the disorder that look like insensitivity, selfishness, disengagement, and even narcissism. What I find most often is that the neurotypical's tone of voice changes even though she is trying to remain calm when approaching her spouse on the autism spectrum. A major source of sensory overload for a person with ASD is voice, especially tone of voice. The individual often analyzes voice tone first and then decodes the words used by the speaker later. Voice inflection by the speaker may convey a negative attitude, for example, sarcasm, irritation, criticism, and so on. A negative tone can be offensive to an autistic spouse, particularly if he's not sure why the speaker is using a particular inflection. For example, is she upset with me? Did I do something wrong? Why does she sound mad? While the ability toward extreme focus can be a strong point for a person on the autism spectrum, it's a problem when he can't shift away from thinking about things that are not of his choosing. In this case, downloading voice inflection as threatening.
When the two of you are arguing, the two of you are going at it, and it almost looks like it's an equal battle. Who's winning and who's losing? He's winning because as he's over there displaying his anger, that he is fully engaged in anxiety reduction. That was the whole reason he got wound up to begin with. He got anxious, game on. He's over there running his mouth. He is actually in the process of alleviating his anxiety. He's discharging this negative pent-up anxiety. She's over there getting more anxious. So when you are arguing with him and the two of you are going at it, he is discharging negative energy while you're building negative energy. Mm-hmm. You lose. And then you're the one to not forget this the next day, the next week, the next month. You remember shit from 5 years ago. He can't even remember something from yesterday. He will blow up, have his meltdown 5 minutes later. He's fine. You're not. If he blew up in front of you and the kids, the whole family's traumatized for a week, he's perfectly fine. You lose.
You suspect your partner has Asperger's or a high-functioning autism. What should you do? Approaching your partner with the idea that he or she may have an autism spectrum disorder can result in two completely different responses. Either your partner is concerned and interested in pursuing an answer to some obvious issues, or he is in complete denial. Your partner may even decide that the problem stems from you. In all honesty, most people on the autism spectrum are well aware that they don't process things like other individuals. Relationships of any variety have been difficult since childhood. Sensory issues have plagued them, like noises others don't hear and lights that others can ignore. The way they carry themselves seems less than graceful to fairly clumsy. Their obsessions overtake any attempt at normal social conversation. Yes, they know they are quirky, but have no concept of the reasons behind these differences. Let's assume that your partner knows that something is different about the way he interprets life. In this case, he or she may be searching for the reason and welcome your involvement. You can find resources on the internet that will help you understand your partner better and decide what action you both need to take, if any. On the internet, you can find articles that describe ASD in terms that your partner can relate to, and also several mini evaluations that can help your partner decide if he or she wants to pursue a diagnosis. Now let's assume that your partner denies the possibility of being on the spectrum. As his significant other, you have to respect his decision to keep things the way they are. But this doesn't mean that you have to join him in denial. If you're married to a suspected adult with ASD, you can use a little help yourself to cope with the eccentric behavior. Contact your local chapter of any autism or Asperger's support association. They offer assistance in all areas: therapy, steps to a diagnosis, family support, spouse support. Once you find the resources and support you need for yourself, you'll be able to pass your knowledge on to your partner. How you relay this knowledge, either directly or indirectly, depends on his or her response to the subject of Asperger's. As a woman with Asperger's who has been happily married for almost 30 years to a man with Asperger's, and the mother of a daughter and 4 sons who are all on the spectrum, and the grandmother of little spectrumites, and as a fully human being with a complete range of emotions, I would like to say that it is the mismatch between different neurologies that causes most of the problems. Oh, and I'm the daughter and granddaughter of spectrumites too. I have dropped my non-Asperger's friends over the years because I was unable to meet their expectations that I should change to be more like them. They never tried to understand me, yet expected me to understand them. I have great spectrum friends, and we have fortnightly family get-togethers that are huge fun. Socializing with other spectrumites is easy. We understand each other's body language. Eye contact is not a problem, nor is bluntness and honesty in conversation. We make allowances for each other's sensory difficulties and can tell if the other is uncomfortable and why. Hey guys, this is Mark Hutten with AdultAspergersChat.com, and today I wanted to address this business of when he, in this case he, is going to be the spouse with autism spectrum disorder, when he drifts away. And what I mean by that is, a lot of times she, the NT wife, will email me or post a comment in some of my Facebook pages, and she will say, well, you know, we were working on things, making a deliberate effort to do so, and things went well for, a couple weeks. And then he stopped doing it. It being, there was actually some conversation, give and take conversation, some emotional reciprocity. He was actually showing some affection and some empathy and providing some, moral support and so forth. Making a good faith effort. He really tried. He wants to make her happy, and he was doing well for a while. And then he starts drifting away. And what I mean by that is, some of his connectedness starts to wane, and then she, the NT wife, views that as, oh, we're right back to square one again. this was just a temporary thing. It was just a phase. It wasn't genuine, and we're right back to this business of me feeling like I'm not important anymore. But you know what? Because of the mind blindness and the alexithymia business, and if you have any questions about that, I've got a ton of videos on those two things. He doesn't know he's drifting away. He's not purposely having the thought, oh, this emotional reciprocity is killing me. I've got to go back to my special interest because she's annoying and I just don't want to spend that much time with her. He doesn't have those kinds of thoughts. He doesn't know that the connection is starting to deteriorate. He's out of touch with his emotions. He's out of touch with your emotions. He's not reading your body language, your facial cues. He's not picking up on your comments if you're suggesting that he's slipping. He's going to have to take a direct cue from you, the NT wife, that we're starting to revert back to our old poor relatedness skills. And so you could come up with a phrase or a keyword. You could just say something tactfully like, honey, I think we're slipping. And you can let him know ahead of time what that means. What that means is we were doing well for a while. We were actually having some give and take in conversation. You're actually showing me some empathy, some affection. I could tell that you were trying. And now it seems as though you have stopped trying. That's his cue when you say we're slipping. He knows what that means. And he, in most cases, I have found that he will go, oh, okay, well, thanks for telling me because I didn't know. I wasn't purposely trying to disconnect. I thought we were still connected. So if you find that he is doing well for a time and you actually feel like you're getting somewhere, making some progress, but then it starts to revert back, you're going to have to let him know. He's not doing it intentionally. He doesn't know the subtleties of your feelings. He can't read your feelings. He can't read your mind. You're going to have to let him know in very concrete terms, hey, we're slipping. We were doing well. I want to go back to how we were going and getting along 2 weeks ago. Remember that? 2 weeks ago when things were going pretty good? I want to go back to that again. And he will, in most cases, go, okay, yeah, thanks for telling me. Okay? So the moral to this story is, when you're doing well for a time and things start to slip, let him know. We're slipping. Can we go back to, we were doing pretty good a couple weeks ago. Can we go back to that? That would be a big help to him. Thanks, guys. Okay, and this next question is, my husband has many, if not most, of the traits of Asperger's syndrome, but he refuses to talk about it or go for a diagnosis. Instead, he says, I'm just blaming him for our marriage problems. I'm about to the end of my rope. Any suggestions? Well, if your Asperger's husband's symptoms are threatening your marriage and he chooses to protect those symptoms rather than manage those symptoms, then his priorities may not be conducive to a long-term relationship, quite honestly. And I know that's hard to hear. And notice I do say manage the symptoms rather than trying to fix them or control them. It's about managing symptoms, which is very, very possible. So if his priorities remain the same, you, in this case being the neurotypical wife, need to decide whether or not this is the right relationship for you. Even if he does decide to get a diagnosis and does accept that as a fact, you still need a strategy to resolve disagreements. I have received probably hundreds of emails from neurotypical wives who say that their husbands are simply in denial. But the bottom line is this: your husband has to make a choice about what he values most, his marriage or refusing to seek a diagnosis. There's the million-dollar question right there. What does he value most, his marriage or refusing to seek a diagnosis? If he values his relationship with you more than staying in refusal mode, then he'll go and see if he has the disorder. If he values staying in refusal mode more than his marriage, then quite honestly, you'll need to do some serious soul searching to decide whether you're going to stay in this relationship or not. But on a more positive note, there's a certain way that you can go about this that may make him a little more inclined to seek a diagnosis. If your husband has Asperger's but he doesn't know it, it's going to affect him anyway. And if he does know, he can minimize the negative impact while at the same time leverage the positive. And there's many more positives associated with the disorder than negatives. So without the knowledge that he has Asperger's, he may fill in that void with other more damaging explanations of his behavior. For example, he might say, I'm a failure, I'm weird, I'm a disappointment, not living up to my potential, I'm no good at this marriage thing, I'm a failure, and so on. So he's probably filled in the blank, him not knowing whether or not he has the disorder, with some very negative self-talk. So as you try to talk with your husband about this, you'll want to be sure to discuss his strengths rather than focusing on the weaknesses or the challenges or the deficits that you have witnessed. And all adults with Asperger's have significant areas of strength. In fact, I'll go one better than that. They have more strengths than deficits. And that's what you need to focus on as you're trying to get him hooked into the idea of going and seeking a diagnosis. So if you'll include a lot of positive things you see in him that may also be related to Asperger's, he's not going to feel attacked by you or blamed by you. And this may make him a bit more open to the possibility of facing his fears by going for a diagnosis. And that's what you're running into here with him being in denial, is he's afraid of what he may find out. Hey guys, this is Mark Hutten with AdultAspergersChat.com, and I wanted to respond to an email that I got from in this case it was a neurotypical wife who is married to husband with Asperger's syndrome, and her question is in reference to a video that I put up a few days ago, and I'll have the link to that below this video, which describes how people with Asperger's syndrome tend to prefer spending time with their special interest or their work more so than relationships. She's wanting to know what do you do in a case where you're wanting to have a deeper connection with, in this case, an Asperger's husband who does seem to be preoccupied with his, in this case, computer gaming, and she's kind of feeling isolated and unloved. So the question is, what do you do in a case like this? Keep in mind that people with Asperger's syndrome, they have less of a need for social connection. They have a small relationship gas tank, so to speak. We'll use an example of Thanksgiving Day, where you, being the neurotypical wife, you could probably go to your family on Thanksgiving Day and spend 3 to 5 hours chatting, laughing, sharing stories, and so on, and you drag your Asperger's husband along with you. After about 30 minutes, he's burnt out, and he may hibernate over in the corner somewhere and play on his cell phone. And it's not like he's purposely trying to be antisocial, it's just that his relationship tank is full. And now he needs a timeout, so to speak, in order to de-stress. Think of it like this. The thermostat determines the temperature in the house. Your apostat determines level of hunger. And I'm going to make up a term here. We'll just call it the relatiostat. So you will need to dial down your relatiostat somewhat. So in dialing down your relatiostat, what you're doing is you're trying to more closely match his level of relationship emotional needs. And that would include sharing feelings, validating one another's feelings, sharing experiences, talking about one another's day, different forms of affection, and so on. He's going to have that need met more quickly than you. So rather than taking it personally and thinking, well, he doesn't want to talk to me or he's being insensitive or uncaring, what's going on there is that his tank is full and yours is not. So in this case, it's highly recommended that you get the rest of your relationship needs met elsewhere with close family and friends. You need to top off your tank because his tank is full quickly and yours is not. But you need and you deserve to top off your tank, but you may have to do that with close friends and family members. You may find that you'll have to go to some parties by yourself or some social gatherings by yourself to get your social needs met. Another thing to consider is joining him in his special interest. If your goal is to spend more time with him and his goal is to spend as much time as possible with his special interest, in some cases it's possible for the neurotypical wife to actually join the husband with Asperger's in his special activity. In this way, it's a win-win because he's continuing to do what he values with his time, and then you're also doing what you value with your time. But I understand it's a tough row to hoe any way you look at it, because if your social emotional needs are high and his are low, it is kind of a chronic mismatch. And it can create problems if you take that personally. But as I stated earlier, in the vast majority of cases, the Asperger's husband, who seems self-absorbed and disconnected from family, is not doing so intentionally. So what I want to look at in this session here is false dilemma, which is a thinking error in people on the autism spectrum. So if you want the definition of false dilemma, it would be a type of logical fallacy that involves a situation in which only two alternatives are considered, when in fact there are additional ones, sometimes shades of gray between the extremes. So would you, as a NT spouse, say that your autistic spouse judges himself as strong or weak, smart or stupid? One or the other. Would you say that he looks for too much certainty in a world full of uncertainty? Would you say that he over-monitors his decisions as right or wrong, good or bad? Would you say that he reacts emotionally when things don't look right? And perhaps does he think in terms of extremes? As I stated earlier, that's black and white thinking or all or nothing thinking. If so, then your autistic spouse is experiencing a false dilemma. In other words, he believes that he's stuck in an awful predicament when in reality he's not. So when people on the autism spectrum fall victim to a false dilemma, they've mistakenly reduced an entire spectrum of possibilities down to the two most extreme options, each the polar opposite of the other without any shades of gray in between. So often those categories are of their own creation, and they're attempting to force the world to conform to their preconceptions about what it should look like. So a false dilemma means seeing the world only in terms of extremes. If things aren't perfect, then they must be horrible. If your autistic husband isn't brilliant, then he thinks he must be stupid. But in real life, situations are almost always shades of gray, almost never black or white. Falling victim to a false dilemma tends to exacerbate depression and anxiety, by the way, and he can't afford to be any more anxious than he already is. So, unfortunately, under duress, people on the autism spectrum often regress to a primitive way of thinking, and they're most prone to regressing to primitive thinking when they're having a hard time and feeling overwhelmed by their own emotions. A regression is a backsliding from age-appropriate functioning and thinking to a more immature way of functioning and thinking. For that one moment, when the autistic person starts relying on the words always or never and views the world in black and white terms, he is slipping back to the way he saw the world as a toddler. So now let's look at some of the problems associated with this false dilemma. A false dilemma often creates artificial needs in the autistic person's life that lead to disappointment and depression. This is his tendency to think that he must have something, or he must do something, or life must be a certain way, otherwise it will be unbearable. The false dilemma doesn't open him up to the possibility that even if life doesn't work out exactly the way he thinks it should, he can still be happy. Another problem is when the individual on the spectrum only sees things in black and white, he misses out on alternative ways of viewing the world. These other perspectives may be just as good, if not better, than his current perspective. So a false dilemma often creates a false choice between A and B when C is the more accurate and helpful view. Unfortunately, if the person only thinks in black and white terms, then he is unlikely to consider C a possibility in the first place. Another problem with the false dilemma is it makes people on the autism spectrum less adaptive to their surroundings. And another problem that occurs as a result of false dilemmas is it doesn't just hurt the person on the autism spectrum, but also the relationship he tries to build with others. So when he views the world in strict and oversimplistic terms, he is less likely to compromise and cooperate with others to meet common interests. This is because he doesn't see the gray areas in life, which is a mind blindness issue that most people on the autism spectrum experience. He believes everything needs to be a specific way, and he isn't willing to deviate from this narrow view of the world. That makes him look stubborn to others, and it is certainly frustrating to live with. Most people on the autism spectrum simply don't have the vocabulary to describe the middle ground. For example, the individual on the spectrum either considers someone to be a friend or not. The concept of different levels of friendship and the gradual building of trust may be unknown. Perhaps worst of all for people on the autism spectrum is the perfectionism pursuant to a false dilemma and the self-condemnation which may follow. So many people on the spectrum often think they should be doing everything right, because if it's not right or perfect, it's certainly wrong or a failure. In this way, the false dilemma may underlie some of the refusals and difficulty initiating that you often see in your autistic spouse. So learning, which involves first not knowing things and gradually learning them while making mistakes along the way, can be an excruciating process for people on the spectrum.